What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we're going to be branching off from our previous video, which was covering the best superstar abilities and in my opinion on the best superstar abilities for offensive players. Today we're going to go over defensive players in succession, and we're going to go through my opinions on which traits I like on my players in franchise mode for defense. Anybody defensive line through defensive back essentially is what we're going to talk about today. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And honestly, we can probably group most defensive backs together when we're starting out here, but there are some different abilities for safeties that are a little bit more powerful than for cornerbacks. But to start off, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the safeties in the game. You don't really have that many to choose from in terms of X factors. You have things like Zone Hawk, which can be relatively effective because they increase catch knockout rates and interceptions while you're actually in zone coverage. So that is one of my favorite X factor abilities for safeties. Personally speaking, I think some of the things like reinforcement, not too bad because this really kind of has a little bit more to do with defeating run blocks. So if you're playing your safeties in the box and things like that, that might help you out, but really not all that useful. Selfless, personally don't see it as all that useful. Don't see momentum shift as all that useful. I mean, that can be powerful if you have an opponent that is constantly getting into the zone, but not very useful. And then universal coverage is probably one of the ones that is the best, because when you enter the zone, you're nearly guaranteed knockouts on receptions. And so, I mean, that's probably one of the best traits there, and probably one of my favorites to have for defensive backs. Outside of that, shutdown, I think that kind of applies as well to both safeties and cornerbacks. I think shutdown is one that is really effective to have because it allows you to have tighter coverage, and you get more interceptions and things like that from contested catches. So basically, for X factor abilities for cornerbacks and safeties, I'm looking at Zone Hawk, universal coverage, or shutdown, depending on specifically what you want them to do. And then in terms of superstar abilities, again, these things are going to vary heavily depending on what you specifically want your players to be able to do. For defensive backs, one of my favorite ones to have is tip drill, because if you guys have played Madden for a while, you know that there are a lot of tipped passes, and there's a lot of times that your guys have opportunities to come down with a ball on tipped passes, that are bobbling around between a couple players, and they probably don't come down with them all that often. Well, having tip drill on a player is going to increase your catch chance on tipped passes. And that's going to be really effective. Now, the deep zone KOs and zone KOs and things like that are not bad to have on any of your defensive backs. And like I said, I still am kind of grouping in cornerbacks and safeties together. The KOs aren't bad to have on those players because those are areas where some of these players operate, and having increased knockouts is effective. But personally speaking, with defensive backs, I like to go with the traits that are going to kind of affect getting turnovers more than anything, and so that's why I immediately went to tip drill. In addition to that, I really like to go with acrobat, because essentially this improves the defender's ability to dive for passes and interceptions. And so along with tip drill, acrobat is a trait that's going to allow you to get more turnovers, get more pass breakups and things like that from the defensive perspective. And like I said, anything that in my personal opinion impacts a player's ability to get turnovers on the defensive side of the ball is extremely useful. And so acrobat really contributes to that, because you'll see players with those kind of teleport animations where they get interceptions that most other players wouldn't, because they're diving for them at a further distance and things like that. And so acrobat, tip drill, those ones are some of my top ones. Now, there are a lot of ones that I consider to be kind of useless for these types of defenders. If you have a defender that's good enough that, like a Tyrann Mathieu that has superstar abilities in the secondary, you really don't need, tackling traits like unfakeable, reach elite. Those things aren't really going to help you all that much. Tackle supreme, I mean, if you see your players getting faked out a lot, then I guess maybe you could put these things on there, but I just find them to be not all that effective, especially on players that are this high overall that are probably already really good tacklers in themselves. And so there are a lot of tackling related traits, especially for safeties, that they'll probably have. Oftentimes these guys will get tackling related traits because they are safeties, especially strong safety, and those things aren't all that useful. And so I wanted to kind of shout out acrobat and tip drill. Strip specialist is not bad if you're somebody that's going for strips quite a bit, but outside of that, I really don't see most of those things as useful outside of, the ones that actually affect their zone coverage and knockout ability, and then their interception ability like tip drill and acrobat. So I think that those are really, really useful. And then, there are some other ones here that I don't think are all that useful as well. I think lurker, this one isn't too bad to have, because if you're going to be utilizing the user coverage, being able to make 180 degree interceptions while lurking in the middle of the field can be effective. But one of the things that I will say with that is a lot of these players, defensive backs especially, already have enough agility and mobility to be able to make interceptions in pretty much any different direction that you choose. And so I don't really think, I think lurker is maybe a little overrated. I feel like a lot of people might try to get that on their user player, especially if it's a user safety, and in reality I think they don't need it. I think this is one that's maybe would be better for a linebacker or something like that. And then again, there's a lot of things here that really aren't that great. One of the ones that I do like quite a bit is actually Stonewall, if you are going to go with more of a run stopping safety. This is a trait that when we get to linebackers, this is one that I like to have on all of my linebackers if possible. And simply because Madden is animation driven, and so many good running backs and even lower overall running backs get those animations where they're falling forward for extra yards all the time. If you have players on your defense that can prevent those offensive players, those running backs especially, from always falling forward and gaining extra yardage, Stonewall essentially can be the difference between a 3rd and inches and a first down. And so that is really effective to have, especially on linebackers, but occasionally on your safeties if they're coming up and helping out in those situations. Getting a guy that's going to prevent those fall forward animations is really helpful. So that is looking at some of the top safety abilities in the game. Let's go ahead over to cornerback. I believe they have pretty much most of the same abilities, but we can see here that Jalen Ramsey, for example, has bottleneck, which we did not see for safety. When they enter the zone, likely to dominantly win any man press encounter. That's actually a pretty effective trait to have. Personally speaking, I like that one quite a bit. But we've already kind of covered most of the other X factors as well. And then in terms of other ones that you can get, things like pick artist are, fairly effective to have, because this is a higher chance to catch uncontested interceptions. It depends on what slider set you're going to be playing with in a franchise mode, but I really do like having something like pick artist that's going to pretty much guarantee that this guy's going to come down with the ball if it's thrown his way. I think that that's really nice to have. And then again, there's more route knockouts, like deep route knockout, medium route knockout, depending on what you're asking your guys to do. The zone chuck ability is one that I've actually seen people use quite effectively in franchise mode, depending on what you're trying to do, in terms of a user, because a lot of people I've seen user cornerbacks, especially as like a slot cornerback. This can be really effective because you're going to slow down your target after a successful zone chuck, and that can prevent a receiver from getting open for quite a bit of time, and it can really throw off the timing of the offense. It can allow your pressure to get there and things like that. So this is one that I've seen a lot of success with, and I feel like it might be a little underrated because people do tend to go with the route knockouts, and they tend to go with things like pick artists that will generate more turnovers, and that's certainly not wrong by any means, but I really like chuck out if you're somebody that can effectively use a corner, or at least get that chuck off early and then switch to another position or something like that. And so that's one that I like, and then I think that we've pretty much gone over the others here. Yeah, I think that we've gone over pretty much the others. That's pretty much what I would utilize for defensive backs. I think that those are fairly straightforward. In terms of linebackers, some of the ones that I really like to use, I had already mentioned Stonewall. That's probably one of my favorites. Again, there's going to be a lot of things like tackle supreme and things like that prevent you from getting faked out. But again, if you have a guy like Bobby Wagner, you're probably not going to be getting faked out regardless. And so I tend to lean towards Stonewall, again, as like my number one trait for linebackers to have, because you can prevent you can prevent those fall forward animations. But there are some other things that are effective here for your linebackers. If you often have your linebackers, in matchups against halfbacks, for example, outmatched is a good one because they'll, basically force catch knockouts in running back catch situations and things like that. Let's see, what else? Film study will have vision of plays on the offense, scaling number of times each quarter. This is one that I think that I actually kind of maybe failed to look at for safeties. This one is a good one to have as well. This kind of goes back to my previous video where you're gathering information from the other side of the field. Anytime that you can have something that gives you some information on what the opponent is trying to do, that can be really effective for you. And so film study, and I kind of forgot to mention it when I was looking at Tyrann Mathieu because I believe it was there. Film study can be really effective. Anything that gathers information for you like that. Enforcer is a good one. Defenders with this ability don't allow broken tackles when hit sticking ball carriers. So if you're somebody that likes to hit stick quite a bit, Enforcer can be quite effective. Again, I go back to Stonewall as really effective. Things, personally speaking, I think there are a lot of traits like Closer and things like that affect how quickly a player can get into their zone and things like that. I stay away from those. I really don't find those to be all that effective because, for the one or two times that you might get your player to enter the zone in the game and get that to work, that just kind of doesn't balance out with me to having something like Stonewall that's going to help you every single play, or something like medium route KO that's going to help you every single play as a linebacker, or every time that somebody goes into that area, or you're operating in that area. Lumberjack is a pretty good one. Essentially what this does is it's going to not allow broken tackles, so we are going back to that thing where the broken tackles thing I try to stay away from. But the nice thing about this is you're going to cause more fumbles when cut sticking ball carriers, and so if you can get good at cut sticking ball carriers with a linebacker or something like that, you can generate a lot more fumbles. And like I said, I like things that generate turnovers, and so we had mentioned when we were looking at defensive backs that I like things like tip drill and whatnot. Anything that can cause turnovers, anything that can cause fumbles, especially for linebackers, is going to be pretty good. Lurker is one that I had mentioned when we were looking at defensive backs that I don't think is necessary for defensive backs, but again, for a user linebacker, Lurker can be really effective at generating more turnovers for you. And then there are some things like inside stuff and run stopper that I don't really think are all that useful. I mean, run stopper is not too bad. I think that there are some better things to have, especially with a high overall player like Bobby Wagner. You're not going to be in areas where you're going to really have to do block shed attempts, and you're not going to really have to be in those positions, especially if you're a high overall linebacker like this anyway. You're going to have decent enough block shed to not really get eaten up in the run game. So again, I go back to things like Stonewall, film study, Lumberjack. Those are some of the better ones for linebackers. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other slot as well, if this will load. So again, you can get some of the really effective ones on your linebackers as well, like tip drill. But again, I stay away from things like secure tackler, recuperation, no outsiders, unfakeable. I really don't personally see those as all that effective, because these guys are good tacklers to begin with, and if you put yourself in good enough position, it's not going to be a problem. Under pressure, it looks like an ability that Bobby Wagner can get, not something that I'm going to see as all that effective from my linebackers. Unless you're looking at a the outside linebacker, but I'm going to talk about those separately. We can look at both outside linebackers and, essentially 3-4 outside linebackers and 4-3 defensive ends. We can look at them as the same because we're looking at them as pass rushers. And then I would say anything that would be a 4-3 linebacker, somebody that's not really going to be pass rushing. I don't know who would be a good example, like a Hassan Reddick. I mean, I guess he does pass rush a little bit. Some of the 4-3 linebackers that are out there, you're considering them more so of a essentially a middle linebacker type of player, maybe like a Matt Milano and whatnot. There really aren't that many. Miles Jack, I guess, would be a good example of that. Not a pass rusher, but more of just a traditional type of linebacker. You're looking at stuff like we pointed out with Bobby Wagner. So if we're going to look at some of the edge rushers, though, we're going to kind of together include these 3-4 outside linebackers in addition to the other guys. And so let me go ahead and go to D-end. We'll go to Aaron Donald because I believe he has access to everything. And take a look at his abilities. I think from an X factor perspective, it's kind of hard to go wrong with edge rushers. You guys can see here that Aaron Donald has blitz. When he enters the zone, opposing blockers have less or have their resistance points bars wiped out. That can be rather effective. I don't mind having that. I think that one of the ones that I like to have is relentless. Is when you're in the zone, your pass rush moves are free because that allows you to just consistently essentially go with pass rush moves over and over again, and on long plays that's going to allow them to get free. I also really like Unstoppable Force. This is going to increase their win rate and block shed speed against one-on-one pass blocks. More often than not, for an edge rusher, you're going to be in a one-on-one situation. And so Unstoppable Force, really, really effective for an edge rusher. I stay away from reinforcement, run stuffer, and momentum shift. I don't see them as all that useful. I mean, run stuffer could be decent, but we're talking about edge rushers here. You're talking about guys that are trying to get to the quarterback. You're not trying to talk about run stuffers here. I guess if you had, Fearmonger, that is a pretty good one as well. You're going to be able to apply significant pressure on quarterbacks while engaged with blockers. So this is like while you're not actually sacking the quarterback, but you're kind of in his territory, you're still pressuring him and causing him to make bad throws, especially against CPUs. This can be effective, but not one of my top ones. My top ones would be Unstoppable Force, Relentless, and maybe Blitz. In terms of actual superstar abilities, again, I stay away from the ones that extend my pressure range. You can see Aaron Donald has under pressure. They're going to pressure quarterbacks from a greater distance. Don't get me wrong, that's effective, and that helps to pressure quarterbacks, but when you're going up against better quarterbacks, that doesn't phase them. If you have quarterbacks that have the trait that is ideal sense pressure and things like that, and they have good throw under pressure rating, then this isn't really going to affect them to begin with. And so I try to get a trait that is going to affect all situations, and so something like edge threat is pretty good. More dominant pass rush moves while rushing from the edge of the defense. That's just a straight up benefit to everything you're trying to do as a defender. If you're trying to do some run stuff type of things, reach elite isn't bad. Run stopper isn't bad. Not something that I'm going to go crazy on. Again, I talked about this on the offensive side with offensive linemen, but I stay away from things that give me one specific type of move benefit. So like Ripper, not all that useful. I also stay away from the things that give me like cheaper essentially moves. They don't use up as many points because, again, I just think that it is not as effective. So like Double or Nothing, Instant Rebate, those things I stay away from. Unpredictable. I stay away from the things that affect resistance bars. I don't really find them to be all that useful. What I will say is defensive rally is really good to have on at least one of your defensive linemen, because what this does is it grants a bonus pass rush point to all defensive linemen on 3rd and 4th down, which essentially means everybody will at least be able to use one pass rush move on 3rd and 4th down. That can be rather effective, but that's just kind of an overall thing. I would prefer to have that on like an interior defensive lineman and maybe use something more like an edge threat on my very good edge pass rushers. I think that that's kind of a little bit more important. There's more stuff regarding pass rush points that I don't think are all that effective. Pass rush move points, I just stay away from those things. Speedster is one that I like quite a bit. I know that you guys are probably aware that in my Steelers franchise I got Danielle Hunter. Anytime that you can have an edge rusher that has really good speed, that's kind of the route that I like to go with edge rushers, and Speedster is really useful on them. You're actually ignoring a bar of blocker resistance when attempting speed rush moves. So this is one exception to my rule where I'm going to talk about, generally I talk about, I stay away from things that affect pass rush blocking or resistance points and things like that. And the speedster thing is like a thing that you can utilize over and over and over again. And as a speed rusher, the most effective thing that I've found you can do is actually just speed rush around the end and not even try to do a specific type of move. So I like speedster quite a bit. Again, I stay away from spinner because that's not all that effective. Ripper's not all that effective, but speedster is effective for that type of a trait. And then one trait that I've heard a lot of people talk about is something like pass committed. If you actually commit and guess pass, this is supposed to essentially give you dominant wins against pass blocks, but it doesn't. I've yet to see anybody actually have this positively affect their game. I've used this many times and I've never been able to actually get it to activate or look like it's actually being effective. So in my personal opinion, I think this looks like a really good one because it's like, on third down they're obviously going to be passing the ball. All I have to do is guess pass and I'm going to get dominant wins against pass blocks, and that just simply doesn't happen. And so this was one that I wanted to highlight specifically because there's, it looks like a really good trait in theory, but it never actually does anything. Maybe you guys have different experience with it, but that is certainly something that I wanted to point out. This one, El Toro, very effective. This one is kind of the bull rush equivalent of speedster. While it is something that only affects bull rushing, it only affects one type of move, it is super effective because the two best types of pass rush moves that I've found, at least in franchise mode, are the bull rush and then the speed move around the outside. So El Toro, really useful to have. You're going to dominantly win your bull rushes when your pass rush points are full, so all you have to do is let that fill up, and then you're going to get a straight up rush into the backfield and basically an automatic sack. I mean, that's what El Toro is. El Toro is like an automatic sack if you get there. So that's one that's really effective to have. And then outside of that, we've kind of already talked about a lot of these other things. These are all like tackling related, strip specialists, goal line stuff, inside stuff, no outsiders, unfakeable. These aren't going to be all that useful to have on your edge rushers. Maybe strip specialists if that's something that you're looking to do as an edge rusher, if you're user controlling them and then trying to strip the quarterback or strip the running back whenever they bounce outside and things like that, that could be effective. One of the ones that I do kind of like to have, if you have to put something here that you're not preferable on, goal line stuff can be pretty effective. I like that additional block shedding within 5 yards on the goal line because that can be crucial. I know that it's not something that affects things every single play like I typically like to have, but that's a situation where it's very crucial to get big time block sheds and things like that. So I do like that for edge rushers. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about interior defensive linemen. We could look at a variety of different players. 3-4 DNs like Cam Hayward, all the way to D tackles, 4-3 D tackles, and things like Fletcher Cox and whatnot. So let's go ahead and look at Fletcher Cox. Basically, the X factor abilities are pretty much going to be the same, except with the exception of things like run stuffer do become more effective for interior defensive linemen and more viable. Because you're going to be expecting a little bit less pressure from your interior defensive lineman than your exterior defensive lineman. So it's a little bit less important for you guys to focus on things like relentless or blitz or things like that, or unstoppable force from the inside. Like unstoppable force, for example, is probably going to be relatively useless for an interior defensive lineman, which is a big difference from edge rushers because this is for one-on-one pass blocks. And very rarely as a D tackle are you ever going to face a one-on-one one-on-one pass blocker. Very rarely as an interior defensive lineman are you ever going to face a one-on-one pass block. And so you're going to be looking more towards things, relentless is decent. I like run stuffer on interior guys. This is going to increase their win rates on, one-on-one run blocks, which do happen quite a bit. It's not always going to be a double team against your D tackle, especially if you move them into the correct position. So you can kind of get very effective block sheds out of those things. But to be quite truthful with you, X factors don't seem to have too much of an impact for D tackles in franchise mode, in my personal opinion. Then a lot of the other things here are going to be quite the same. El Toro is probably going to be the trait that you want to have on a D tackle or an interior defensive lineman, because these guys are power rushers. Generally speaking, you're not going to have many finesse rushers or speed rushers as D tackles or interior defensive linemen. Don't get me wrong, they are out there, but El Toro is probably the direction that you guys are going to be looking to go. However, there are quite a few things here that now become a little bit more important whenever you actually take a look, because these guys are going to be a little bit more of a run stuffing type of player. If you're taking a look at something like a inside stuff or goal line stuff, those will become quite a bit more important to have on a D tackle or interior defensive lineman, and they're pretty effective in comparison to on an edge rusher. So I wanted to point that out, as well as reach elite is probably one of the best ones that you can have on an interior defensive lineman. This one kind of overrides a lot of the other traits because this is going to be something that's going to activate quite a bit. Defenders with this ability can and will, they should add that in there, can and will reach out of engaged blocks to tackle or sack nearby ball carriers. Really effective because, generally speaking, they're not going to have a free shot at the quarterback. They're not going to have a free shot at the running back. They're going to have to reach out of the block that they're engaged in order to make a play. And so reach elite really helps superstar D tackles and interior defensive linemen to be effective. And then this is another one where stonewall becomes really effective. If you have somebody that's really good at block shedding and engaging with the running back, stonewall can be really useful to prevent that running back from getting those fall forward animations and preventing them from getting those extra yards. That kind of combines really well with goal line stuff. If you get a goal line stuff where you can get a really nice block shed in that 5 yard range, and then you have stonewall on top of it, you can pretty much guarantee that a running back is not going to be going up the middle on you and getting a clean path to the end zone within the 5 yard line. So that's a really nice combination to have, but that's kind of where I'm looking at, big time reach elite for interior defensive linemen. And then outside of that, there's not too much more to address from the defensive side of the ball. It's pretty straightforward position to position, and more. There are bigger position groups and less positions to go over. I don't have to go one by one like we did on offense, because there's not as many differences. You have your interior defensive linemen, you have your edge rushers, you have basically what I call roaming linebackers, and then you have defensive backs, and they pretty much all group together like that. And it's hard to go wrong with defensive traits on the on that side of the ball, but there are some that are more useful than others. Those are my picks. Let me know in the comments section what your picks are. Let me know if you disagree with some of my picks or if you agree with my picks. Whatever. No big deal. Hopefully you guys did enjoy the video and you find this information useful. Those are the traits that I like to use on my superstar players in franchise mode. Make sure you guys leave a like on the video, comment down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new, hit that bell notification button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good night.